Iran has a number of laws that can be surprising or even shocking to those outside the country due to its strict adherence to Sharia law and its unique legal system. These laws regulate everything from personal freedoms to social behaviours, reflecting the deeply religious and conservative structure of the Iranian government. Here are some of the most shocking laws in Iran. Polygamy in Iran. A man can legally have up to 4 wives at one time, as permitted under Islamic law. However, taking multiple wives is less common and is often associated with traditional or rural areas, as many Iranians in urban areas prefer monogamous relationships. While polygamy is legal, it often requires permission from the first wife in practice, especially in urban and educated families. Although technically allowed, polygamy is subject to conditions, and Iranian law emphasizes fairness to all wives, making it financially and emotionally challenging for many men to take multiple wives. Temporary marriage, also known as sigeh or mut'ah. Iran also recognizes temporary marriages known as sigeh or mut'ah. These marriages can last for a fixed period from a few hours to several years and are typically used as a form of relationship that provides some legal framework for the couple. Temporary marriage allows a man to have relationships outside of his primary marriage without violating Islamic law. The legal minimum age for marriage in Iran varies by gender, with additional requirements for very young marriages. For girls, the minimum legal age for marriage is 13 years old. However, girls younger than 13 can marry with the consent of their father and permission from a judge. This means that in exceptional cases, girls as young as 9 have been legally married, though this is increasingly rare and subject to controversy. For boys, the legal minimum age for marriage is 15 years old, but boys younger than 15 can also marry with parental and judicial consent. Social and legal controversy. Early and polygamous marriages are controversial in Iran, especially among urban populations and activists advocating for women's and children's rights. Many Iranians and advocacy groups push for reforms to increase the minimum age for marriage to protect young girls. Judges can sometimes approve marriages below the minimum legal age, which has drawn criticism from international human rights organizations that argue these practices risk exploitation and child abuse. In summary, polygamy and early marriage are legally permitted in Iran, though subject to specific conditions and considerable social debate. Polygamy is relatively rare in urban areas, and there is a growing movement within Iran advocating for higher marriage ages and greater protections for young girls. Mandatory hijab for women. All women, including tourists, are legally required to wear a hijab or headscarf and dress modestly in public. This includes covering their arms and legs and wearing loose-fitting clothing. Violating this dress code can result in fines, detainment, or, in extreme cases, imprisonment. The morality police actively enforce this law, and recent protests against it have led to significant crackdowns. Ban on alcohol. Iran strictly enforces an alcohol ban under Islamic law, making the production, sale or consumption of alcohol illegal. Those caught drinking alcohol can face heavy penalties, including flogging and jail time. Despite the ban, a black market for alcohol exists, and people sometimes hold private gatherings where they drink at significant risk of punishment. Criminalization of same-sex relationships. Homosexuality is illegal in Iran and can carry severe penalties, including the death penalty for men. Same-sex relationships are treated as crimes, and those found guilty can face imprisonment, flogging, or even execution. Iran's laws against homosexuality are some of the strictest in the world, and LGBTQ+ rights are severely restricted. Severe punishment for adultery. Adultery is punishable by death in Iran, often through stoning, although stoning is less commonly practiced today. Married individuals convicted of having extramarital affairs can face execution by hanging or other severe punishments. Stoning remains in the legal code and can technically still be used, although international pressure has led to a decrease in its application. Public executions. Iran has one of the highest execution rates in the world, and certain crimes like murder, drug trafficking, and some forms of political dissent can lead to the death penalty. Some executions, particularly for violent crimes or waging war against God, Mohareba, are conducted publicly to serve as a deterrent, which is considered shocking by international standards. Restrictions on Western music and culture are quite stringent in Iran. Western music, fashion and media are heavily restricted. Music with romantic or sexual themes, as well as certain Western genres like rock and rap, are officially banned from public broadcast. Western fashion, especially clothing with English logos or symbols, is also discouraged. Iranians are expected to wear modest clothing that aligns with Islamic standards. Severe punishments for drug-related crimes are a harsh reality in Iran. Drug trafficking is considered a capital offence, with penalties that can include the death penalty. Although recent reforms have reduced some death sentences for drug crimes, Iran still imposes severe penalties. These include long prison sentences and, in some cases, execution. This strict approach to drug offences has led to thousands of executions over the years. Gender segregation in public spaces is strictly enforced in Iran. This includes certain workplaces, schools and transportation. Men and women who are not related are often restricted from interacting freely in public. In public transportation, there are separate sections for men and women. Additionally, certain public areas, such as some parks or beaches, are gender segregated. Restrictions on social media and internet use. Iran imposes strict controls on social media and internet access. Platforms like Facebook, Twitter and YouTube are banned, though many Iranians use VPNs to access these sites. The government monitors online activity closely, and criticism of the government or religious authorities on social media can lead to imprisonment or worse. Strict regulation of women's rights. Women in Iran face several legal restrictions that affect their rights and freedoms, including travel restrictions. Married women need their husband's permission to travel outside the country. Custody rights. In divorce cases, custody of children often defaults to the father. Inheritance laws. Women receive half the inheritance that a male relative would under Islamic inheritance law. Prohibition of public displays of affection. Public displays of affection, or PDA, are strictly forbidden even for married couples. Holding hands is sometimes tolerated, but kissing, hugging or more intimate displays in public can lead to warnings, fines or even imprisonment, as these are viewed as violations of Islamic modesty standards. Ban on pets in public. Although Iranians are allowed to own pets privately, walking dogs in public is banned in many cities, as dogs are considered unclean in Islamic tradition. Those caught with dogs in public can face fines, and pets may be confiscated. Dog ownership is tolerated more in private, but it is generally discouraged by authorities. Restrictions on non-Islamic religious practices. Iran has strict laws concerning religious minorities. Conversion from Islam to another faith, known as apostasy, is considered a crime punishable by death. Christian, Baha'i, and other minority religious practices are restricted, and proselytizing or attempting to convert Muslims is illegal. Baha'is, in particular, face severe persecution, including limitations on education, employment, and property ownership. Lashing as a punishment. Flogging is a form of corporal punishment where a person is whipped or beaten with a stick, whip, or rod. It is intended to cause physical pain and is often used as a form of punishment for various crimes in certain countries that follow strict interpretations of religious or traditional laws. In Iran, flogging is legally sanctioned and may be applied as punishment for a range of offences, including drinking alcohol, theft, adultery, and certain forms of dissent or blasphemy. The punishment is typically carried out by striking the offender's back or other parts of the body a specific number of times, often in a public or semi-public setting. The number of lashes varies depending on the crime, with sentences ranging from dozens to hundreds of lashes. The severity of the punishment is intended to act as a deterrent, and the process can leave physical scars, bruises, and injuries. These laws reflect Iran's conservative religious and political framework, and many of them would be considered shocking by international standards due to their restrictions on personal freedoms, severe penalties, and alignment with a strict interpretation of Islamic law. While some Iranians work within or around these restrictions, the enforcement of these laws remains a defining feature of life in Iran. In Iran, stoning is a legally sanctioned form of capital punishment under the Islamic Penal Code, though it has been used less frequently in recent years due to international pressure and public criticism. Stoning remains a part of Iranian law, especially for certain moral and religious offences. Here are the most shocking laws that can carry a sentence of stoning. 1. Adultery by a married person. The most notable offence punishable by stoning in Iran is adultery committed by a married person. If a married man or woman engages in consensual extramarital relations, they can be sentenced to death by stoning. Under Iranian law, a married person is considered to have committed a more severe violation of Islamic moral codes than an unmarried person, which is why the punishment is harsher. Proof requirements. To convict someone of adultery, Iranian law traditionally requires 4 reliable witnesses or a confession. However, confessions can be obtained under duress, and the burden of proof has been controversial. Exceptions. While stoning is technically the punishment, judges may use their discretion to impose a different sentence, such as hanging, especially due to pressure from human rights organizations. 2. Incest and other forbidden sexual relations. Incest and other forms of forbidden sexual relations, such as relations between close relatives, can carry the punishment of stoning under Iran's interpretation of Islamic law. These acts are considered highly immoral and carry severe penalties as a deterrent to maintain the sanctity of family structures. Rape is severely punished in Iran, typically by hanging, but if the rapist is married, they could be sentenced to stoning. While hanging is the more common punishment for rape, stoning remains a possible penalty in cases where the convicted individual is married, as the act is seen as a double violation against both the victim and the institution of marriage. Homosexuality is illegal in Iran and is punishable by various forms of punishment, including flogging and, in severe cases, the death penalty. According to Islamic law as applied in Iran, certain consensual same-sex acts, especially between men and if the individuals are married, can theoretically be punishable by stoning, though in practice, execution by hanging is more common for this offence. In a stoning execution, the convicted individual is buried up to their waist for men or chest for women in the ground. Stones of a specific size, large enough to cause injury but not large enough to kill immediately, are thrown at the individual until death. Stoning as a punishment has drawn widespread condemnation from international human rights organizations and the United Nations, which consider it a form of torture. Due to this pressure, Iran has reduced its use of stoning in recent years, and in many cases, sentences are commuted to other forms of punishment, such as hanging. However, stoning remains technically in Iran's penal code, especially for severe moral offences, making it a symbolic and controversial part of Iran's legal system. Iran's legal system may seem restrictive or backward from a Western perspective because it follows principles that differ greatly from secular or more liberal frameworks. However, this approach reflects a complex blend of historical, cultural, religious and political factors that influence how laws are created and enforced. Here are some of the main reasons why Iran's laws may appear conservative or restrictive. 1. Religious foundations. Iran's legal system is heavily influenced by Sharia law, rooted in Islamic principles, especially Shia Islam, which is the state religion. After the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Iran officially became an Islamic republic, with the goal of basing its laws on Islamic teachings. This religious foundation means that Iranian laws reflect values and moral codes derived from Islam, which emphasize modesty, social order, and moral conduct. In Shia Islamic tradition, there is often an emphasis on conservatism in social, family, and moral issues. This means laws around gender roles, dress codes, and public behavior reflect these traditional religious teachings which can seem restrictive by modern Western standards. 1. Political structure and authority of clergy. Iran's political system grants significant power to religious authorities. The supreme leader, a religious figure, has ultimate authority over the government, and high-ranking clerics play key roles in shaping laws. This theocratic model means that religious interpretations can directly impact legislation, unlike in secular governments where religious and state matters are separate. This structure naturally enforces more conservative and religiously aligned laws. 1. Legacy of the 1979 Islamic Revolution. The Islamic Revolution was a response to perceived westernization and moral decay under the previous regime, which was more secular and aligned with Western powers. The revolutionary leaders sought to return to what they saw as authentic Islamic values, creating a system of laws that they believed would safeguard Iran's culture and moral integrity against Western influence. This ideological shift led to laws and policies that often prioritized traditional Islamic values over modernization or liberalization. 1. Cultural values and social norms. Many Iranians, particularly in more rural or conservative parts of the country, uphold traditional values that align with the country's laws. For example, family unity, respect for religious teachings, and adherence to modesty are deeply ingrained in Iranian culture. Laws around modest dress, family life, and gender roles reflect these cultural values and the societal expectation that individuals will adhere to these standards. 1. Fear of Western influence. Iranian leaders are often wary of Western cultural influence, which they perceive as a threat to Iran's Islamic identity. This fear of cultural erosion leads to strict regulations on Western media, dress, and behavior. The government enforces these laws as a way to protect the country's identity from what it sees as moral or cultural degradation associated with Western values. 1. Legal rigidity and resistance to change. Iran's legal system is based on religious jurisprudence, which is inherently conservative and resistant to rapid change. Reinterpreting Islamic laws is challenging, as religious leaders may view changes as compromising Islamic principles. Therefore, the system remains relatively inflexible, and any legal reforms that conflict with traditional teachings face significant opposition from conservative clerics. 1. Geopolitical pressures and isolation. Iran's international isolation, due in part to sanctions and tense relations with Western countries, has also contributed to its conservatism. Many leaders see strict adherence to Islamic principles as a way to resist external pressures, preserve national sovereignty, and reinforce unity against perceived foreign threats. As a result, the laws may remain conservative as a statement of independence and resilience. 1. Public versus private divide. In Iran, there is often a notable distinction between public and private life. While public laws are conservative and strictly enforced, many Iranians find ways to live more freely in private settings. People may express themselves more liberally at home or in trusted social circles, which creates a duality where public life remains conservative, while private life can be more modern and flexible. 1. Emerging push for reform. Despite these factors, there is a strong movement for reform within Iran, particularly among younger Iranians who advocate for more freedoms and modernization. These groups push for changes in laws related to women's rights, dress codes, and personal freedoms. However, the path to reform is slow and faces resistance from the conservative establishment, which sees these reforms as potentially eroding the Islamic foundation of the state. Conclusion: Iran's laws may appear backward from a Western perspective, but they reflect the country's historical context, religious foundations, cultural values, and political structure. The laws are influenced by a combination of religious conservatism, ideological commitment to Islamic governance, and resistance to westernization. While these laws may seem restrictive, they are grounded in deeply held beliefs about maintaining a religious and cultural identity that is distinct from Western norms. If you found this video interesting, please hit the like button and share. And if you haven't already, please come on over and join our growing family by subscribing to our channel. Be sure to tune in for more educational videos. Thank you for watching.